He said to me, the best photos are the photos that you take while people are not ready for it, right? It
Okay.
comes out naturally, right? Like if you're like talking to a bunch of friends or whatever, Ashim, whatever you are, you're awesome, you know. And yeah, so okay, so data validations, right? Let's start this tree. Let's talk about software. And I want to apologize to people who, kind of people came back to me on the private chats and, where are you? Why are you guys? I tried to do some rearrangements and dealing with some life situations, and I had to kind of reschedule a couple of times. But finally, I found a good time for me and Chris. Christo, this is usually an okay time for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool,
That
cool.
should be good.
Saturdays are for everyone, and then give people a chance. I also, by the way, someone someone also told me this. He said if you put way too much content out there, people won't be able to catch up. But if you
Yeah.
give them once or twice a week, um, they'll be able to catch up with you. So Ed here says hello from Morocco. Hello. I don't know what time it is over there in Morocco, but hello. Um, Okay, so what are we what are we going to talk about today? We want to talk about we built the happy path,
Yeah.
right? We built the happy path. We basically went out there and we said, okay, I want to be able to add a source, right? We talked about edge entities that don't necessarily need, to be attached to anything else. They're the easiest ones because you don't have to wait for another entity to be ready, right? Um, let's get started with something called the validations. And I want everyone like if you're listening to this the first time, I want you to bear with me about what validations are, right? A lot of people kind of might mix the types of validations. They might think, oh, a validation is a validation. But validations are actually three different types. There are three main different types. And listen to me on this one because they won't teach you this in college. So hear me out. There are levels to validations. There is something called structural structural validations. What's an example of a structural validation? If you're checking if something is null or not, if you're checking something is a number or not, that's a structural validation. So this is an example. If you go and say, something like name is null, that's a structural validation. There's another type in here called logical validation. What's a logical validation? When you have the value, structurally the value is correct, but logically the value doesn't make any sense. I'll give you an example. If someone goes and says, I'll tell you a funny story about this. If someone goes and says, oh, the date of birth for a person that's applying to a school is the 1200s. So they tell you this, 5 or 6 1. So I was born, someone comes to your school and registers as a student, and they say, I was born in June 1st, the 1200s. That's an illogical value that you need to catch, and basically say this is invalid. This doesn't make any sense, right? Just expand this a little bit further. So when something is structurally valid but logically invalid, right? That's basically what this is. And then there's something called remote validations or external validations. An external validation is basically when you have to call an external thing to go tell you whether this value that's coming through is true or not, right? And this is very useful when it comes to like distributed systems. You're calling a different API, you're trying to register for a license at the DMV. I don't know how to explain DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's what they call it here in the US. With you're trying to kind of, and you're basically going and checking to see if that person is already registered, right? So the data could be structurally correct, it could be logically correct, right? But it could be externally incorrect, right? So like saying a student already exists. This is an example of a remote validation or external validations, right? What do you think, Krista? Does that make sense? Sounds
Yeah,
like
that
it.
makes sense. Yeah, it's like didn't exist or not found.
Yep. And up until very recently, actually, I'll just take a couple of questions. So, Jalaluddin, hi, how are you? Vladimir and Jamshid Bek, nice to meet you all. There's a question here from SK SkyMel. Maybe the last is business layer validation. No, these are all business layer validations, by the way. All of this is business layer validations. Business layer validation handles all of that. I'll tell you about a couple of things that happen in the .NET world today, and maybe you'll understand why we insist on making sure all our validations sit in the place where the domain is being handled. We'll get to that part in a second. But here's a funny story first. So up until very recently, I could go and teach people and give them an example of a logical validation that a person's name can't have numbers in it, for example. What do you think, Krista? Have you ever seen someone with numbers in their name?
No.
Right? And then um, Elon Musk, the famous person, he basically went and called his son. I don't even know still how to spell it, or I just kind of pronounce it, but that's his son's name. He made his son's name like that. And now we have a problem. We have a number in a way. If he represents his own name as a number, we can't do anything about it, right? And then there are a bunch of symbols, special characters, same thing, right? And then you have that. So and a dash in there. I mean, dash, yeah, there are names with dashes in it, but that part would be a problem. What do you think about that? That's funny, right? It changes the whole concept, and what I really want people to kind of understand is that there's this thing called Murphy's Law. If something can happen, it will happen, right? So if someone can put numbers in their name, they're going to put numbers in their name. It's just about what are the business rules that you want to enforce in that flow, right? That's very important. Now, number two thing, I want you to just pay attention with me. There is there is why the reason why we try to keep all of that into the services layer, which is the business layer, like SkyMill was saying, is because there's always this push on going and saying, oh, public class student, like that. And then you go and say something like public string name, like this. And then people basically go up in here and start adding rules, right? So the model that's supposed to be agnostic doesn't have any logic in it. Now people put validations in it, right? And how are you supposed to test drive that? How are you supposed to capture that problem, when you're adding it in your model? What if your model allows, yeah, plays by different rules and different services? Now your model became a problem in itself, and now you are forced to create new models. I'll give you an example. I think there's like max length, something like that, right? Or not null or
Yeah.
something like that. They keep adding things over and over and over again into these things, right? There's another example. These are bad. Like that, this is bad. Don't use that. Don't use these things. Keep your business logic in a place where you can test drive it. Keep your models agnostic. Keep them anemic. Keep them not knowing about how they're going to be used or what they're going to be used for. The other example that I've seen people do in the UI world, they'll go and say, this is my input, right? And then they add validations in there, right? So at the UI level, they go and add some rules over there. Well, if your rules changed, if you have 20 UIs, like imagine that you have 20 different UIs. Let me show you this. And this happens in the real world. At the enterprise level, you're going to see this all the time. You have this backend microservice sitting up in here, right? Let's say this is my API, and my API has all the business logic in it, right? And then you went and created 3 different websites that basically use that API. So if you put your rules, your logical and external logic, validation logic, rules in every UI in here, That means every time you change these rules, and they will change, just like that. That's why I brought up that example of people having numbers in their names. If you change the rules here, you have to change them here and here and here, and you feel like you're doing the same thing in different systems, right? That becomes a huge problem, very costly, very problematic. You're going to forget some systems, especially if you have external clients. Like, what if you don't own that UI? That's some other team or some other business or some other company that's using that system, right? What's going to happen then? What's basically going to happen is that you're going to change your rules, but they still have the old rules, and now you have a disaster. People are saying we're entering it. UI says the value is correct, right? But in reality, the backend is not corresponding to that. Let me show you a funny example. I want to show you a funny example of it. A friend of mine, he likes to tinker around. He likes to try different things and whatnot. And when he's visiting a website, he likes to go and look at the backend code of that site, right? Just to see what things look like. As part of his explorations, he found out a website. I think it's a popular website that basically says, if you like, on the UI itself, it says max length is 20. I don't know if I showed you this already, Christo, but on the website itself, it's a max length 20, but the rules internally in the code itself, still on the UI, not even the backend, is saying something else. There it is. Let me show you. Let me show you the. Here it is. So here's the here. So here is the funny. Here you go. Check this out. Do you see? So in here on the UI, it says between 8 to 30 characters on Activision. But in the code itself, it says max length 20. So that's not even,
Mm.
it didn't even go to the UI level, to the API level,
Mm.
but it's hilarious nonetheless, right? We have a question here from Vladimir. Hassan, what's your opinion on primitive obsession and value objects? Primitive obsession and value objects. What do you think, Crystal? I don't know what that means.
No, I'm not sure either.
Can you explain, Vladimir, what primitive obsession means and value objects? Explain that to me. The term might be okay. So I did talk a lot, right? I want to now just kind of start adding some validations, both structural and potentially logical, to the Get File Sources Foundation service. What do you think, Crystal? Ready?
Yeah.
Ready to
Shall I
roll?
take? Yeah.
Let's do it. So let me find, so Get File Core API. That's our guy.
Mm.
Let me pull the screen. Let me pull this screen. There you go. And let's see what. Oh, I was showing people a bunch of things. Let me revert that. And let me get latest. Should I get latest from main? Did people add a lot of things in main, or should we just keep going? It's probably a good
Uh,
habit.
I think it's up to date. I did merge.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I'm not sure what's in the main at the moment, but all that brokers came in, so we can bring them in or not.
It shouldn't break anything, but if it does, we should catch those as they evolve. Like if you have a long running branch like this one that we're
Mm.
dealing with. Actually, let me change the screen to 200%. I want people to be and confirm with me on the screen if you're not able to see the IDE. Let's go back here, put that there, da, 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 like that. Can you guys see the screen okay?
Yeah.
Uh, Tiago says, or Tiago, the primitive obsession and value objects are domain-driven design concepts. I didn't do my homework. I don't know what these are. You're gonna have to explain them to me like I'm a 3-year-old. I probably know practically what they mean, maybe, but whether they fit into the standard or not, that's a discussion we need to have. But I don't know. I actually don't know. Okay, let's pull main in. So I'm gonna right click on remote and say merge into current branch. So I'm pulling main into this merge. Let's hope we don't have conflicts. We shouldn't, right? We shouldn't have. Look, 66. Sync. We shouldn't have anything. It's all good because we're writing great code, right? It shouldn't break. The code is intentionally extremely isolated, so it should be just fine. All right. So just quick favor from people watching this, if the screen is visible, especially the right side, just confirm with me. I always leave it at 200%, but I want to make sure people are
Mm.
comfortable and
The
okay.
right side is a little bit small, but the middle block is fine.
Okay. That's because I can control this guy
Mm.
here, right? Okay. Anyway, let's go to this one. So this is logic.add. I'm gonna go up in here and I'm gonna create a new file. So you see source service test.logic.add. I'm gonna create another file. I'm gonna be lazy here. I'm just gonna copy this file, and then I'm gonna go here and say validations.add. Okay. Someone suggested mentioning the operation first and then the actual action. I'm okay either way. I think both of them are fine. It's up to you how you can do it. But usually, what we've been doing is that we mention the type of the operation and then what the operation is. So, all the logical pieces and add and modify and delete and retrieve and so on and so forth. Okay, let's do this. So, what are we really passing? Like when you're thinking about validation, you're passing an input source, right? So, obviously, the first thing I want to do is to be able to go and say, validate that this source is not null. So, given when then, like that. And then I'm going to go and say, should throw validation exception if source is null and log it async. So this is me basically setting up the premise of what really needs to happen. I'm gonna go here and say here's a source, invalid null source, like that, right? And I need an exception, right? So expected null source exception. There you go. This guy's already doing the work for me. And I'm gonna go up in here and basically say in under models. So I have models, you have sources. I'm gonna create a new folder here. I'm gonna call it exceptions. And I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it null source exception. There you go. Null source exception will inherit from something called exception with the X. It kind of helps us kind of validate things. We don't have this library. Let's go pull that library. This is a standard community supported library, so it's a really nice library to take a look at. And I think it's all kind of uh, I think we moved it to the standard organization, Christo, right? And
Yeah,
I think it's in a clean shape. Yeah, cool. See, it says Hassan and Christo. You have the right from the authors, right? It has almost a quarter million downloads on it. It's pretty cool. Okay, let's go back here. It says exception. And what do I want to do? Here's a constructor. You have to pass the message now. So string message, right? And we basically go and say base message in here, and that's pretty much it. And you basically want to say source is null, right? So that's basically the error. Let's go back to my code here, null source exception, and then I want to go here and say message source is null. Is that fair? Looks like a good
yeah,
deal, right? Which means that I also need, this is actually not expected. This is just null source exception. Let me see here. This should just say null source exception. That's the inner exception, but we wrap that into a categorical exception. I'm gonna let Chris to explain that in a second, but there's an internal local exception that explains the problem, and then there's a categorical exception that makes the consumer of these foundation services know which direction to take at a high level. Because one foundation service could produce as many as 20 exceptions. Unless you categorize those, you're basically telling the consumer upstream to validate and go over each and every one of them to know what to do with it. It's not the best way to operate at this level. So I'm just going to go here and say this is expected source validation exception. This guy knows what I'm doing. We didn't even write any of these exceptions in this project yet.
Mhm.
So that's weird. Um, yeah, so you have null source exception, that's your inner exception. And then there's also a message. So this is inner exception. And then there's also the message, and the message should say source validation error occurred, fix errors, and try again, like that. And that's your inner exception, and the rest of that goes away. I feel like we've put enough in the on GitHub that now GitHub will just find examples for you outside of the box and just help you with your solution, which is totally fine by me. So source validation exception, here's the thing. This guy inherits from exception. Here you go. And then here's a CTOR, takes in a string message and an exception, inner exception. Base message is a message and an error exception is an error exception. I think that's pretty good, right? Um, there is a question here from Anas. Anas, what do you think if we apply result pattern of errors instead of exception classes? What do you think about that, Krista? I've seen that roaming the internet these days. So you know what he's saying? Like instead of throwing an exception, right? You wrap it and return it. So your method basically looks something like this: result and then student, get student async or something like that, right? And then if it errors, it doesn't throw an exception. The result has a state on it that says error. How do you feel about that?
I've not used it myself, but
Mhm.
it is similar to what you get on the APIs, where you can wrap your um, exception response in your JSON. But
Right,
I think um, I do want to throw an exception in the backend so that you can handle logging and retry and all that stuff. I don't just want to return it.
exactly. I think there's a lot more to throwing an exception than just telling the system that you have an error. That the language in general, actually most of programming languages, they have all kinds of different ways of representing an exception. And I think that when you are throwing an exception, you're doing a lot more to your system. I know there's what's going on the internet now. Exceptions are so expensive. Don't throw exceptions anymore. That's an iteration that software engineers have gone through at some point in time in the past, and they decided to abandon it because it just, all that ecosystem that you're building into, if you don't play by these same rules, right, what you're going to have and what you're going to run into is you're going to run into a situation where you say, well, this logging only catches exceptions at a global level, right? And I can't do it right here, right? Like right now, when you throw an exception, you're terminating the process, right? How are you supposed to log that there is an error at your service level if you don't throw an exception, if you don't terminate the process? Because the result that you're talking about in here implies that the process moves on, but you don't want the process to move on. You actually want to reach a terminal state. So how are you gonna log at the service level this way, right? Unless you embed your logging in the result object, or even worse, make global logging, which won't allow you to translate, control the flow, or anything like that. So that's my personal opinion. I think it would be problematic if you try to take that approach. But what I always tell people is give it a shot. Don't take anyone's word for anything. Give it a shot, always. Okay, so we have this source task, value task, add source task. I'm not even writing any code anymore. This feels weird. And then we expect your source validation exception to this actual source validation exception, and then assert throws a sync source validation exception. And I think we need an await in here, right, for that. And I think also we don't need this as task. If I remember this correctly, you need to take this out.
Yeah.
There you go. See, I remember the people that teach me this. I remember exactly how they found out. Like the guy who figured this one out, he found it by accident. He was still learning the standard and he's just trying to type things and it just didn't show an error. I said, stop, stop, stop right there. What is that? So it's just beautiful how we're it's not just people that teach you the standards, just coming from everywhere, you know. Okay, and then what do we expect here? The actual validation exception, not the message though. Thanks to Christo on this one. See, I see Christo every time I do this. Should be should be equivalent to just the fact that you can do something like that. That's Christo for you right here. He went in, he built that in. That's not outside of the box. This is coming from the exception assertions, which is part of this library that we just pulled in, right? What else we expect? We expect that our dependencies will never be called, right? So the only dependency that will be called is your logging broker. See, this goes back to your question, Anas, right? If I don't do that, like this is log error, I think, yeah. If I don't do that and return a result, how are you going to log that problem? That's an issue, right? So this is where it's at. Um, I'll get back to this same exception as, but we also expect that our main broker should never be called. Broker.insert source async with any should never be called. That's the broker that would be called normally when the flow is going well. And then you basically order your brokers based on the chronological order for it. So storage broker, verify no other calls. So what we're doing here is that we're basically going and saying, make sure that these guys never get called other than what has been previously specified, right? But Christo, we still have to solve the problem with people adding code inside of our system, right?
I did a little bit of that, but before we talk about that, I think I got a question in this week as well, so it's probably a good place to ask this as
Hmm.
well for other people.
Hmm.
Can you explain why you add the never
Oh, here
in there?
your
Yeah.
basic. So this is a form of documentation. Remember, unit tests are a form of documentation. You're basically saying if it wasn't for this call, for this error, this should never has happened. This here is more than enough to cover that piece.
Mm,
But you're not telling the story. This is why I always tell people you're not telling what was really supposed, because down here you could have a third or a fourth dependency in here that never gets called anyway,
mm,
whether you errored out or not, right?
yeah.
But in here, I'm specifically saying, hey, normally in that flow, you would have called these pieces. I want to explicitly say this should never happen. This call should never occur, in that particular flow.
Mm. Yeah, because the discussion we had is that people think that that is redundant code because the verify no other calls will um, check
So
that for you if there's an unexpected invocation. So,
So
um,
so so they're right and wrong. They're right. It is redundant code. They're wrong that it doesn't tell that story
mm,
of what was supposed to happen, right? Like how do you distinguish between a dependency and a particular method that was supposed to be called when that error occurs versus another, right? Think about this like it's like you're telling a story. You're saying, if it wasn't for this problem, I would have called this. But also
mm,
make sure that nothing else is called. That's how it
yeah,
translates in my mind.
yeah,
I get that question a lot, a lot, a lot. People say, "Well, why? Why do we need that?" Well, you need to tell people what would have happened. Um, Someone also like the strongest argument was someone that says, "Well, why don't you just look at the happy path test, the test that says this is what would have happened." I said, "Well, now you have to jump between two places to understand the story,
mm,
right?" And this comes in very handy when you're building orchestration services, when you have to call multiple methods on two or three services, this will become very handy. So you understand where that error came from and why it happened and all that. Anyway, what is this same we were gonna discuss something before that, and then you
yeah.
said,
The error handling. Ach, not the timeout thing that we prevent
"Oh
people from.
yeah." So what did you come to? What was your conclusion?
Um, Let me quickly open the branch. I can show you. Um,
Uh-huh.
I've shared my screen there for you. Um, so I had a bit of a play with it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nice exercise. Um, I found in some articles on the internet that they say that this fact method is not really designed for
Or timing out.
asynchronous yeah, for asynchronous operations. So
Mm.
if you put a timeout in there, if your test is async, you're going to have mixed results. So,
Ah.
so because our test is async, I sort of went and took the pattern that we already use
Mm-hmm.
for try catches,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then in our service method, um, created a delegate,
Mm-hmm.
and then I wrapped a cancellation token for the task in there,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that will throw you exception. And then on your logic test, it basically means that you can wrap your code internally like that, and you can
Ah.
specify your timeout, um,
Interesting.
and that all pass. Um, I think this also allows us a little bit of extra flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
because in terms of orchestration services,
Mm-hmm.
we generate, if we process collections, we generate random items, a
Mm-hmm.
random number of items.
Mm-hmm.
So if we put timeout in the fact,
Mm-hmm.
um, it won't have knowledge that you've now generated 10 items where previously you've maybe done one or two. So
Does it
if you know
work?
that you if yeah, yeah, so you can do uh, uh, if you put a random number in there,
Mm.
you can multiply your expectancy by the times of where your, if you put it in the fact up at the top, it'll be hard coded. But if you think it's going to be like that, you can say uh, times random number to make your test vary with the amount of cycles that you've introduced, if you've got a for loop or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you a bit more flexibility. I've not
Interesting.
played much more than just this, um, but yeah, it does give a lot less variations on the output.
I think.
Um,
I think.
uh,
I think. Go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead.
and the other thing as well is, we also mentioned last time that because we're working on different spec machines, you have to allow
Yep.
a certain buffer.
Yep.
So if you have small commands, say for instance, in your implementation, you got file.delete,
Uh-huh.
something like that might slip through and you still wouldn't know about it.
Yep. You won't be able to catch it. Yep. Yep.
So I think um, this is very good for performance type testing, but little things will still sneak through. Um,
Interesting.
uh, yeah, don't have an answer for that one yet, but um, I think it's definitely a good thing for performance type testing. Um,
Well, I have an answer for you. Do you want to see my answer?
yeah, let's do it.
So, I actually I actually went to dig into this because I think it's important enough, right? I think it's important enough for us to kind of think about these problems and actually try to solve them, right? I think also it's important enough that we kind of try as much as possible to strive towards even better solutions to what we do. And here's what I came up with. I dug deep, and this is the beautiful thing about doing things in a way that you don't know, or in ways that you don't know, right? You get to dig into things, and you get to see, like, is my approach correct? Can I actually find a proper solution? Because I remember
Mm,
the last time you and I, the last time you and I had this conversation, I know it bothered you and me. Like, both of
mm,
us were kind of, there has to be a solution for this. That's how you say an engineer cares, right? They basically go and say, there has to be a certain solution for this, right? So here's what I came up with. Are you ready for this?
Mm.
You know, if I tell you something like that, it's probably going to be great, right? It's probably going to be a really good thing. I dug deep. I started counting the instructions, the
Okay.
instructions at the code level. So you have this Mono library. There's Mono.sys library, which is pretty wild library, right? It basically goes and literally counts every instruction on the method, and it gives you a weight, like an actual size to your method. So let me show you what it does. I'm going to run this code here. Watch this. This is one of the methods that we have in here. And people watching this, you better listen up. You won't find this anywhere. Look, that's the low level, the intermediate code. NOP is no operation. That's what that means. Those the little squiggly brackets that you put in there. Um, and then it prints out everything. So not just that, there's a lot more interesting things into that part, which basically tells you here's the weight of your method or the size of the code of your method. So I'm gonna put a breakpoint in here. I'm gonna show you this. It's wild. It's very wild. I'm gonna put a breakpoint here, and then I'm gonna run this thing, and then I'm gonna do a quick watch. I hope can you see the quick? Oh, you can't. You can't see it because StreamYard is fun. Going back to add watch. How about add watch? You can see this. Is this visible to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Watch this. If you go into the method body, it'll tell you your code size here is 13. Okay? I will go and switch from foo to foo2. Foo2 is different because foo2 has John in it, print line, versus foo that has just print line. Let's look at the size. Watch this. If I go and get the watch again, here's the body. What's the size? It was 13, right? It's 15. Here's what's cooler about this. What's even cooler about this. You can prevent specific things because apparently there's a thing called op opcode, and it has every single, hold on, opcodes dot. Do you see all this? Oh, you can't see it. Shoot. I really
Mm.
hate. Let me go to the definition of this. Here, that's every possible
Oh wow.
operation in C sharp that you can have. So I can literally, it sounds like that we can, and then I'll tell you the bad news in a second, but it sounds like we can actually write a library that says ensure that it has if statements, prevent for loops, prevent what's
No,
even.
nice.
How do you feel about that? I bet you
Mm.
didn't think you're gonna learn something like that today. Tell me.
Yeah. It's
So
always something to play with when we talk.
so even better, it can tell you if someone is monkeying around with exception handling directly, going back to Anas Matar question, which is like, what about, exception handling? Do we return an error message? Watch this. Your method in here, which is a method definition, has inside of it at the body level, it's a massive, I already clicked, yeah, there you go. So at the body of the method, if you go in here, it has a thing that says, does it have exceptions? And what are these exceptions? I think I just ruined Christo's weekend. He's gonna
Mm.
go and dig into this for days. This is why I'm telling you this, because we're collaboratively working. Here's the one problem with that. Try to do that with a method that has a value task in it as a wrapper. The value task makes the rest of the instructions so negligible that your processor doesn't even consider them as instructions.
Sure.
So that's me handing back to you and saying, let me just give you that code first, okay? Is it fair? Can I give you
Yeah.
that code? Because I think that would make you happy. I think we're getting really close, and I'll tell you why that's important for people who don't understand the context of this. If you write, even the best engineers out there that write the best test-driven software, you can still go into their methods and monkey around and put like a for loop that calls console write line 50,000 times, right? And their unit test is not going to catch that. This community, starting with Christo, then me, and then the rest of the community, we're at the verge of solving that problem once and for all. This is truly what visionary vanguards do. We're just literally breaking into a field that nobody even cares, to look into. So I'm gonna put this code in like a, what do you think, Chris? I'm gonna put it in a gist. Do we still have gists in GitHub? We still do, right? We should.
Yeah, should still be there. Yeah.
Here, here's a gist. So this is a gist right here. File name, breaking boundaries .cs, right? And then create a gist. How can I make it public? Create public gist. There you go. Here's the code. I'm gonna put it in the chat for people, for Christo mainly, but for everyone else who wants to. Do you have the link, Christo?
Yeah.
Got it? What do you think about that? Great breakthrough, right? You have to dig deep. You have to go at the.
Interesting.
And by
Yeah.
the way, just using a library like this, it goes well beyond the purpose of ensuring no new instructions were added to your method. You can literally rewrite the contents of your method on the fly if you want to. You're removing and adding instructions on the fly, which is a very dangerous tool, I have to admit. But yeah, that's the plan. Okay, what other questions do you have? We answered Anas, Denise's, Hassan, salam, salam. Just wondering if you know the main character of Aquaman. Yeah, Jason Momoa. It's actually Jason with the, yeah, I get it all the time. Even even the guy at the coffee shop, just driving by asking for coffee. Like, has anyone ever told you that you look like? Just for the people who don't know who that is, it's an actor that people say that I look like him. I don't think I do, but people think I do look like the guy. So you may as well just kind of see what he looks like. People say I look like this guy. I don't look like this guy at all, but people say things. That's the guy that people say I look like. I don't really look like this guy. I mean, that guy's like I'm more like a Timo version of this guy that people would buy on Timo for a cheaper price. Anyway, Um, Ali says, "Can you zoom in?" Yes, absolutely, I can zoom in. Okay, let's go back to, so Crystal, you're excited. I can tell. I gave you something awesome, but still try to do it with value task, and it's very negligible. That's where we're at, and if you can solve that problem, that one last step, then you and I are about to make a breakthrough for the
Yeah.
standard community. I think, I mean, I will dig as well. It's really fun to solve problems like these. I know you enjoy this yourself, but let's get that validation. Let's get that validation test out of the way. So same exception as we gonna do a private static. I think it was a
Expression
yeah, expression, and then inside of it there was like
as a function.
a func, right? And that func will return a boolean, but will take the thing that you're validating, which is the source, right? And then same source as. But we're doing exception here, right? So
Yeah. So
exception.
it's first exception.
Yeah, exception.
Exception. No, swap the boolean exception.
Oh, is it the other way around?
Yeah. It's a function that takes in exception and then returns a
Oh,
boolean.
I always get those wrong. I always put the in out and the other way around. Okay, perfect. So let's do this. Actual exception. No, 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 no. We have Krista to take care of that part too. Actual exception. Uh, what did you do? Is it just should be equivalent to or something like that? Or what did you do for the comparison? Or do we still
Yeah.
do it?
As actual exception dot same exception as.
My man, my man. And this is multi-liner, so we're gonna have to do this. Return same exception. There you go. What do you think? Pretty
Yeah.
cool. This is expected and actual. So what is this going to do? It's going to basically ensure that exceptions match. But why do we have to do this? Why can't we just say log error with that? Because it's not the same exception. It has different reference. So it's not going to work this way.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So
I think we have a good test. Do you think?
yeah, I'm working on an enhancement for that one as well. We
An
need to add it.
announcement?
Enhancement, yeah. So at the moment, just returns a Boolean result.
Mm,
So I think the next version will also return the error detail for you, which will put that in the um, test runners message window.
I thought it did. I thought you
It
did
it
that,
it,
or
it does when you do be equivalent of.
mm,
So it does on the so if you go back to the test,
uh-huh.
uh, so on the login broker,
Logging broker. Okay, let's go back to
so
the test. You mean the failure, the test that
yeah,
just failed, right? Yeah,
yeah.
right here. Yep.
So
Mhm.
so in that
It won't show it now.
on line 40, it'll show you all that detail.
Uh-huh.
So it'll tell you down to if it's an object,
Yep.
what the different values is. But because same exception as is just a Boolean result,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it doesn't show that detail because it doesn't throw an exception. It just say
Mm-hmm.
true false.
Would
So
you be would you then be printing the same error twice? No, because
no,
this will compare what was actually passed to the
yeah,
logging broker versus what was, yeah, I love
yeah.
it. I love it.
So the reason I looked into that as well is because sometimes in your other dependencies, not just in the
Mm-hmm.
login broker, you might uh, pass in a thing that didn't come from the input,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get a null out of your dependency because your setup was wrong, and
Yep.
then you don't know what the detail is. You just get a null on your output, and if you've got that detail on your same exception as, then you can quite easily see what the error is. So I've
I
got a
love it.
local version for that, but
I love it.
I need to put an exception at one point.
You're just busy all the time, just doing. You're up to something. Always up to something, right? Okay, brother. So here's a failing test for you. I'm pushing that upstream. It's
Yeah.
all yours now.
So
Whenever you're ready. Okay, here's your screen.
click over.
Let's do it. So the requirement that I have, just so people understand, is that if the source that is being passed into this method is null, we should appropriately handle that situation. This is structural validation, meaning that something is null or not. So structurally, it's invalid. It doesn't have the bare minimum, right? It's
Yeah,
this new file, so Christo, the validations.add at the test level.
yeah. So
There it
that's the
is.
one we're gonna do now. Yeah. So
Okay. I have to say, I thought I came really close with this instructions thing, and then this whole action result, like value task threw me off completely outside of the waters. Um, it basically says it's a state machine kind of scenario that you're dealing with, and it completely ignores like all the methods, no matter what's inside of them, will share the exact same size. That was heartbreaking, but I'm pretty sure
yeah,
there's got to be a way around. That's why I just gave it to Christo. I was like, Christo, have fun. Yay. You
yeah,
do you, and I'll do me, and we'll figure it out.
yeah. I definitely want to play with that uh, a bit later.
This is us basically doing the things that not just we have never done it before, but we never seen anyone
Yeah,
do that before, at least not in our years of experience. While Christo's doing that, I wanted to kind of go back to just to make this as much of a learning experience as possible for all of us. Um, Vladimir Cabrera asked me earlier about what a primitive obsession is in domain-driven design. So primitive obsession, I'm trying to find out, did he say primitive? Primitive obsession and value objects. And value objects. To avoid primitive obsession and build a stronger domain within the program, a design pattern known as value objects can be used. At its
Mm,
simplest, a value object is a small class that encapsulates the single primitive type, providing a clear name and a new strong type within the system. That sounds like what interesting. That sounds like what Scala does, if I'm not mistaken.
mm,
So you can't you never use primitive operation. You never use primitive types. You use interesting. That's very very interesting. So you know what they're you, so you know, Krista, what they're saying? They're basically saying instead of you passing primitive types,
mm.
you have to wrap every primitive in a custom type. So you never say string
Okay.
email.
Okay. Yeah.
It just feels like an overhead. What's the point of it?
Yeah. I've never used that, so um,
Hmm.
that is close. Um,
So Vladimir, if you're still with us, what would you use that for? Value objects. Because in the standard community we love primitive operations. They're awesome. But I'd like to know what where you stand on that. And I wonder what that looks like if you're trying to pass that data into a database, because eventually you're going to have to come to a primitive level data types to be able to add that in a database.
yeah.
So, so Vladimir, if you're still around, give us your thoughts. So Krista, what is this try catch method that you're doing? What does it do? Is it like a wrapper or something?
Yeah. So it we create a delegate. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so if you look at the function, a normal method, you can pass objects in. There's no way for us to pass a method in without creating a delegate. So a delegate is basically for us that reference to another method, so that
Mm-hmm.
we can pass that function in. So it tidies up our code a bit. So we create a delegate that will then handle
Mm-hmm.
and wrap our code. We've got um, the try catch then that will
Mm-hmm.
then do that function for us. And if there's any errors, it'll handle the catch for us. Um, yeah, I think that's it.
Interesting.
Um,
So it basically kind of abstracts away or kind of puts in a different partial class all the exception handling stuff.
yeah,
So you can only focus on the business logic, on the things that matter. Interesting. Interesting. Look at that. It's writing the code for you.
yeah. So
It's
nice.
it's
If it
getting
works for
there.
you, if
AI
if
is
it
getting there, you know?
um, if it's against you, it's it can be really annoying. So yeah, so it's written all the stuff for us. Um,
I think you need
and
a throw. Uh, oh, you already have a
yeah,
throw.
yeah, I'm gonna yeah, I think it's a
It's
return here.
return. Yeah.
Um, so back to that question that we've got before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've caught an exception here. Um, we now do our categorization
Mm-hmm.
for the validations, and that will wrap that null source exception into a source validation exception.
Mm-hmm.
And because this is not object that we've passed in, it happened inside our method. That's the reason why we need that same as.
Yeah.
So we can construct the same object in our test, but because we've not injected that, we
Has
can't do
different
a reference
reference.
exception. We need to do a
Mm,
value comparison. Um, let me just check if my um,
I
text
think,
is the same.
yep, and I think you need a closing squiggly there.
Yeah,
Yep. So try catch, you need a throw at line 24, I think, because you didn't
yeah,
exit the method. So it even read the message. How crazy is that?
yeah. It's very nice. So
You still kind of need the validation that
the
something is
validation,
null.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we've added that validation there.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to add just one line here, so
Mm-hmm.
that uh, group all the validation into one.
So you created a file for exception handling and another file just for validations, and then the top file is the logic. That's a nice structure. I like
Yeah,
that.
um, and then it's not the one I want to do.
Dinesh says, Hassan, do we really care about data redundancy in case of complex banking software? Because we're using Mongo and we don't care about duplication of data. We do
Mm,
it for each microservice. Well, you need, if you mean by data redundancy, like having multiple references and copies of the same data, that will help you recover. If you
yeah,
have a catastrophic event, right? But you also need to have mechanisms in place that will ensure that this data stays valid from a referential integrity standpoint. So you don't end up with orphan records, right? And you end up with references that don't make any sense because with microservices, that's why you basically, that's the trade-off. You don't have a thing that says, oh, you're adding a student with a reference to a teacher, but the teacher is living in a completely different database in a different microservice. So whether that teacher exists or not, your data record may not be valid.
yeah.
And that's the trade-off that you have, or one of the trade-offs that you have with microservices. You trade off referential integrity. Okay, you need a shift tap on that one and then everything will be fine. So if you highlight
On
the
which one?
try catch, so if you highlight the try catch and everything underneath it and then do shift tap,
Okay, yeah.
boom.
I always intended because I'm used to putting a tab after the
The
what do you
arrow,
call it? Yeah, that's good. I'll change that.
you know what we should do? We should override that arrow and find a cleaner way to do the try catch, like really minimize it. So we don't
Yeah,
have to think about taps, but I don't know how to do that yet. Many ideas, Christo. Thousands of
not enough time.
Not enough time. That's the problem. I'm hoping that we could scale. Yeah, there you go. You made it pass. So can you just like, so Crystal, can you just like real quick explain to people what you did? Because I'm pretty sure I distracted people. So you had a test, and this test basically said validate that if the source that's being passed into your method is null, I
Yeah,
expect you to throw an internal localized exception called null source exception,
yeah,
and then you wrap it with a source validation exception, so for
yeah,
the categorization of the flow. So how did you make this test pass? You basically created, I feel like you created two files,
yeah.
one that has exceptions. Mm-hmm.
So um, it is kind of weird to have the exception file there in the beginning because we've not actually, it looks out of place because we've got two files, but the try catch sits in the exception file. So we
Hmm.
create our delegate first, and then this is the method that we'll point to handle
Hmm.
that instruction.
Hmm.
And then in our main uh, service file, we've then got the try catch. This it says, okay, this is the um, instructions that we want to pass to that try catch, and the delegate signature um, says we expect a value task of source, um, and then if that method gets run, it'll go into this validation method. That
Hmm.
validation method will
Check.
um, check
Hmm.
if we've got null. The next test is going to do our structural validation for us, or the extra structural validation. So this is just a nice grouping because we're going to add the next stuff there. Um, and then we do validate source is not null um, to just pass that exception back for us.
Nice.
Um,
Nice. Okay. Ship it.
um,
Perfect. So what's left here is sorry, still some parts of structural validations. We can do that in the next sessions, but
yeah,
do you have any final remarks for this?
I think if people are new to this, go spend some time trying to figure out what is that try catch exactly.
Hmm.
It'll be good to read up how that try catch and works with delegates if nobody's used it before. Um, and if they want to do a little bit of extra homework, they can read the standard documentation to see what we're going to do next in the validation in terms of rules. Um, it might help them understanding the next bit.
That's true. And I'm gonna put in here also like the standard reference for validations. So just people kind of have an idea of what are the types of validations, why these validations matter, and all that. Here's a massive section in the standard that talks about, validations in foundation service and whatnot. One last question for the day. How do you think for a problem, guys? I mean, there will be tons of solutions for a single problem, but how do you choose an efficient one? Well, here's how this community so far has been super cool about um, producing really high quality solutions to similar problems. Number one, your solution has to work. That's obvious, right? It has to work.
Mm.
You have to come up with a POC, like the one that I was just showing Christo, right? That, oh, look, here's my 2 cents in the matter, and I think it works. Number two, it has to be standard compliant. Like, don't violate the high level rules and principles of the standard. Like, don't go and say, well, I'm going to add validations in the model, right? So even if it works, it doesn't work as a general rule and principle. And then
Mm.
number three, which is the most important one, it has to be pretty. What I mean by that is that the community have to accept it because that's something that people are going to embed in their day-to-day work. Like this try catch pattern that Christo is doing, or the same exception as that I was using. We had to go through multiple iteration. It takes months and months of thinking and trying. Like I can tell you, like this, like some of the problems that we try to solve, um, it's just issues that we go after because we seek a very high quality of the systems that we build, not just on the UI, but internally, right? We think engineers are also customers of our software. And if
Mm.
engineers are customers of our software, then the back end should be just as beautiful as the front end. Unless your front end is ugly, then that's not our problem. We're mostly on the back end side of things. But, you know, uh, obviously we still need to standardize UI and user experience and whatnot.
Mm.
I think that's my 2 cents about that problem, at least from my observation, Christo. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I agree. And I think on your second point, um, if you do break the existing standard rules, Um, we are open for changes if you if
It's true.
people have got something innovative that they want to bring in.
It's very
But
true.
then we'll hash it out with the community and say, ah, this could be something better, or no, actually, we've seen this before. This is the problem, and then people can learn through that.
Yep, that's very true. Very, very true, actually. 100%. Couldn't agree more. Remember, the standard is in draft mode. It'll always be
Yeah.
in draft mode. It's incomplete, never gonna be complete because we as humans, we evolve. We learn about new things. We find new ways of doing the same thing, and maybe the standard is wrong, right? Like if your solution is hitting that exact spot that unveils an issue in the standard itself, not the solution, then even better. Like upgrading principles takes years. Upgrading patterns takes months. Upgrading tools could be a couple of weeks. Oh, we're gonna switch from, bogus to object filler or whatever. We're gonna use Microsoft tests instead of XUnit. So there's tools, patterns, and principles. And the higher you go, the harder it is. Because also you have to understand, like when you go and say, hey, this try catch pattern is crap, then I have to sit down with Greg and basically say, okay, standard version next, and we're gonna have to update millions and millions of lines of code across the board. So it comes with a heavy, heavy cost. Not that we don't
Mm.
like to upgrade our software, it just comes with that pattern. I want to thank everyone, but me mostly I want to thank Christo for joining me in today. Christo, for the community, there are open for grabs issues, there are things open out there, PRs. I will follow up sometimes. Krista will follow up sometimes. Create PRs and try to push with us. The best way to learn this is that we have a bunch of objects, right? And every object multiplied by five, it has five operations. So we did say have contributions, contributor, right? We did have a source, which is the one that we're working on right now. That's three. And there was a fourth one. Which one was it? A repo?
Con- contribution type and repo, yeah.
And then contribution type. So five by five, that's 25 foundation services that need to be created, 25 endpoints, 25 broker methods. So go and build, go and build with us and, pick up issues that are only for grabs so people don't don't take work that someone else is already working on. And maybe by the next time we chat, we would have a new library that tells us someone added new instructions in our methods. I don't know. Christo is a very smart guy, you know, but
Just
we'll
have to
see.
find time. Yeah.
That's my goal, at least, Christo. Like I'm setting it at least for myself to find a
Yeah.
solution to that problem. Because if we figure out that solution, I think I have three other options in addition to the one that I showed you,
Mm.
but they're not cool enough, as cool as the one that I just showed you right now. So that's my top favorite solution. Anyway, thank you everyone. We're
Thank you.
beyond an hour. Thank you, Crystal. We'll talk later. Please take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.